Thank you, John. Hi, everybody. I'm an alcoholic. My name is Mike. I bring you greetings from the Mason-Dixon group of Alcoholics Anonymous in Emmitsburg, Maryland. We're right on the Pennsylvania line. Prior to that, I've only been there about 8 months. Prior to that, I was down in Curie Beach, North Carolina. Remember the Carolina Curie Beach group. But if you watch the Weather Channel, you'll see that Curie Beach is where all the hurricanes hit. After 10 years of having to leave my home about 6 months, 6 weeks every summer, I said, to heck with this. So I headed for the mountains. So I left, and now they haven't had a hurricane since I left. It might have been me. I want to thank Cynthia for a wonderful message this morning. I would say one thing, Cynthia, about your talk. You could try to express a little more enthusiasm if you... I had the privilege of meeting Liz Bailey out on some of her road trips. And the first time I met her was up in Canada, and I was sober about 22 years then, and she changed my life. I spent a few minutes with her, and she changed my life. Ran across her again 3 or 4 years ago out on one of her road trips. She changed my life again. And Cynthia has that same little thing. You see a little Liz in her? It's called enthusiasm. When Liz goes, woo! It changes things. And thank you very much for a powerful message. I want to thank John and everybody, but I particularly want to thank Eileen because John didn't do anything. This morning he brings me this little flower. He says, he fumbled with it. I said, let's go see Eileen. So she put the flower on. I'm taking this neck brace off so you can enjoy the wattles on my neck now that I've turned 65. What this neck brace is, I've got a bone spur we finally discovered after 4 months of treating me for the wrong thing and exacerbating the pain. That maybe I can get removed in a year or two, but I've been spending the last 4.5 months sitting up in a chair, sleeping maybe 2 hours a night and popping ibuprofen. I'll probably have to go to an ibuprofen rehab after I'm through this thing. But people say, why are you fearing so much pain? I've been out every weekend for the last 6 weeks, and next weekend I'll be down in Alabama. Well, how can you do all that traveling? I said, every weekend I've got a new bunch to whine to, for heaven's sake. Why wouldn't you leave? My home group's tired of it. But it's a pleasure to be here. I thank God for this beautiful day. And I had a great experience last night. John picked me up, and Maggie and I hit it off like a couple of old, whatchamacallits in church. And John felt a little left out because we were talking more sense than he was. But she's a great little gal, and I know he's got a wife. I haven't met her. I think he's killed her and buried her in the backyard. She was gone when we got there and gone when we got home. And when we left this morning, she says, bye, honey. Yeah. So you might watch his backyard. The ginger is among the missing. My sobriety date is July 19th, 1970, and the only reason I give that is I sobered up in North Carolina, and if you don't give a sobriety date, they assume you don't have one and tell you to sit down. So I'd like to say something to you new people. We understand. I assume you haven't had a very good year. Now, that won't be funny now, but next year, if you're sober, that'll be a funny line. I was born 71 days after Dr. Bob put down his last drink. That was on June 10th. I was born on July 20th, and I'm told it was in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, right on the Lake Michigan there. St. Luke's Hospital. It was 8:33 in the morning. I told it was a cloudy day, overcast. But at 8:33 in the morning, there was a sound of a spank and the wail of a little infant. And at that very moment, the clouds parted and a beam came down from the sky on the maternity wing of St. Luke's Hospital. And a voice was heard from on high saying, whoops. I was an abused child. I was no sooner born, they spanked me, cut off the end of my wee-wee. It's terrible. I couldn't walk for almost a year. Went to parochial school and things went downhill from there. Our Lady of Perpetual Guilt. And that's kind of I had a little I'm falling apart, for God's sake. I had a triple bypass 3 or 4 years ago, and I was working for the state of North Carolina in the prison system, taking the message to drunks and dope fiends, and working in a rehab in prison for the great Tom I. And the state of North Carolina was kind enough to give me 2 months off without pay to recover from this surgery. But I had a lot of time on my hands, and I read the big book and the big book and the concordance and all these things and the lives of the saints. I want to become. You know, there's a line in this book that says we're not saints. The willing, we're not saints. The point is, what's the point? The point is that we're willing to grow along spiritual lines. And I had to ask myself sometimes in meditation, well, just how far am I willing to grow? Sainthood will work for me. We've got to make a decision just how long we're willing to go with this thing. But I was also looking at way back to see when I first had an experience with alcohol that made it appealing to me. And I grew up in a drinking family, and it was in 1941. It was a few days, the Christmas after Pearl Harbor. And I was up in Kiel, Wisconsin, visiting my grandparents. He was the town druggist. Thank God he died before I got out of high school, or I'd probably ripped him off and got into some other things. A little semi-professional pharmaceutical work, you know. And but I'm a real alcoholic. But it was Christmas, and I was 6 years old. My sister was 8 years old, and my parents were there, and my grandparents. And I was sitting before the great stone fireplace. Now, later I discovered it was just a fireplace, but when you're 3 feet tall, it was the great stone fireplace. And back in those days, on Christmas Eve, in order to get the kids to go to sleep so Santa could come, my parents said they loved me. They're the same ones that lied to me about Santa Claus. So, you know, that's a question here. But they would give us cognac and milk. That would make us sleepy. So they gave me a cognac and milk, and I didn't get sleepy. I got another cognac and milk, and I got a funny feeling behind my knees. I don't know. And all of a sudden, everything was fine, you know. And after the second one, I didn't give a rat's ass whether Santa Claus came or not. You know? I stood up and I looked my 6'4" ex-Marine father right in the knee and demanded a third one, at which point he put me to bed and Santa came. I grew up in a family that taught me how to drink like a gentleman. I was able to do that for quite some time, till I was about 12. And we're back in Kiel. In the summertime, we're visiting the grandparents. We were living in South Milwaukee at the time. And they had, there was a little German community, about 3,000 people. They had the Oompa bands and lots of, you know, Kiel, Wisconsin already, hey, you know, of where we'd bend the corner around, drink out of the bubbler and go up to the stop and go light. That's the way they talked. And all the old people still spoke German. And up there, excuse me, but shit ass was a term of endearment. Come here, Mike, you little shit ass. So I grew up confused. But it was that summer that we saved up our money because they would have this fireman's picnic up in the park, and they would have the Oompa bands, and Dusty Roads rides would come in. And the kids would save up their money. And up there in those days, if you're old enough to get your nickel on the wooden bar outside, you're old enough to get a schooner of beer. So we saved up our money, and the kids rode the tilt-a-whirl and puked, and rode the Ferris wheel and puked, and I drank beer and puked. And I came to my first blackout in my little Irish grandmother's commode right off the kitchen. It was at that point that I knew I'd become a seeker of poetry, beauty, and truth. Because as my head came up from retching and coming to out of this blackout, I saw this inscription that said, Madoc Madurik, made of doo-rock. I said, God, that's beautiful. I noticed these things. I know that John on the second floor has a Kohler. But it seems that Madoc Madurik, made of doo-rock. And I researched many other facilities looking for things like that. Years later, had my wife been less kind, she could have flushed me to death most any night. But I found Kohler of Kohler. That was alliterative, an American standard, and that was patriotic. But never again did I find a Madoc Madurik made of doo-rock. My sister heard my AA story, and once she sold off the family home many years ago, I had a little place up in West Virginia. This big package came. Truck unloaded, and sure enough, it was Madoc Madurik made of doo-rock. So Made an end table out of it. People in West Virginia couldn't figure that out. I said, what the hell's that thing by your couch? So it's my little end table. Looks like a dang commode to me. What are you keeping there? I said, all my important crap, of course. You may think I'm not wired real tight, but neither is your committee. Invited a guy to come all the way from Maryland to tell you something you already know. AA works just fine. But it's a wonderful thing. I grew up in a strange. My dad was a big ex-Marine, and he was a straight shooter. He never could figure me out, and I didn't figure him out. But Mom was a different story. She looked like Katharine Hepburn. After a few scotches, she would talk like Katharine Hepburn. And she was my drinking buddy. And she's the same one that when I became an altar boy, she said, well, you're going to learn not how to just say the Latin. You're going to learn what it means. So she'd pull her hair back in a bun, uncork a Schlitz, and light a cigarette, and we would learn Latin. Et intoi bod altare Dei, Deum qui laetificat. I can remember it to this day. The church may have given up on Latin, but I can't get it out of my head because my mother beat it in there. She was a wonderful woman. She taught me many, many things, even though she may have had, well, she walked like a duck. But she was a wonderful woman, and of course, Dad didn't understand. And years later, that ended up in a broken marriage because Dad never did. It was a horrible case of untreated Al-Anon. He'd go into his weekend rages. You think untreated alcoholism is bad, man? Take a look at our friend Eileen, untreated Al-Anon. She's taking care of everything. Somebody's holding her back from right now to keep it from up and swabbing my brow from perspiration. I don't tell Al-Anon. I have a great respect and a debt to Al-Anon, and I don't. I'm going to tell one Al-Anon story. There's Patty and Sally O'Malley, and Patty was in and out of AA for years and never did get the program. And Sally was a black belt Al-Anon. You know what that's like. But after Patty's many, many failures over 20 years, Sally just said, "The heck with it." So she died. She goes to heaven, and they're saying, "But Sally O'Malley, what are you doing here?" She says, "Well, I just got fed up with her. Here I am, Peter." Well, Peter says, "Well, you just don't walk into the gates." She says, "I don't, do I not?" No, he says, "Well," she says, "what must I do?" He says, "Well, Sally, you've got to pass a little test." "And what is the test?" "Well, you've got to spell a word." "What is it?" "It's love." "Nothing to it," she says. Love. "Well, come on in, Sally. Welcome to heaven. By the way, I've got some things I need to do. And knowing you Al-Anons can run most anything, would you mind taking over the gates of heaven for a while I run? So, of course, I'd be happy to do that. So she turns around. Who's at the gate but Patrick? "Patrick O'Malley, what are you doing here?" "Well," he says, "Sally." He says, "I was at your wake, and we're having such a good... I was mourning you so bad." After the wake and the funeral, I just had to go down to the Pope and celebrate. Mourn some more. And I may have had a couple of... On the way home, this tree leaped out in front of my car, and here I am. She said, "Well, you just don't walk into the gates of heaven." He says, "I don't, do I not?" She says, "No, you don't." He says, "Well, what must I do?" She says, "Well, you've got to spell a word." He says, "All right, what's the word?" She says, "Czechoslovakia." I love being sober. Clancy talks about alcoholism as a disease of perception, and Chuck Chamberlain had that wonderful book of his talks and his retreats called A New Pair of Glasses. And I think they're both right because I just didn't see things right from the get-go. I used to think I was special, that I was abused. It's just, no, I chose not to see things the way they really were. I would be close to the truth, but always about maybe 5 or 10 degrees off. I could be honest with you, as honest as a liar like me could be, and still not be in touch with the truth, if you know what I'm talking about. To me, it was the truth, but it was honest, but it was not on track. So it took Alcoholics Anonymous to get me to the point where I could see things the way they are. I've got a new pair of glasses now. I rode out on a plane yesterday. It was one of those short hop ones. It's just really nice to you. You got an aisle seat and a window seat at the same time. A guy who's so embarrassed, the co-pilot / flight attendant opens a back door. It's about this big, And he says something to me as I get out. Watch your head. I said, excuse me? He says, watch your head. I said, how do I do that? He says, all right, watch your step. So I watched my step and I bumped my head getting off the plane. So. On the seat back in front of me, it says, listen to this. What we do with and we take this for granted, like there's nothing wrong here when they say this kind of stuff. Fasten seat belts while seated. When the hell else are you going to fasten? Hey, look at me, I'm standing up and fasten my seatbelt. Just weird stuff. I used to live on this little island in North Carolina, and they've got these all-night fast food things and convenience stores, and the things they got to have are ice, wine, beer, and hot dogs. So I'm in there one night coming back from doing something, and I was a little hungry, so I wanted a hot dog. I get in there, I noticed something. There's a little bin that says, warm hot dog buns here. So knowing the English language and having a new pair of glasses, I went to the man and said, what does that mean? He says, what do you mean, what does it mean? I said, well, does that mean there are warm hot dog buns here? Or this is where you warm hot dog buns? Or are these warm buns for hot dogs? He said, well, you Yankee son of a bitch, why don't you look inside? I went to the University of Missouri in the 50s, and I met her there. I joined a fraternity. We had a good song. We drank a lot. I majored in Introduction to and minored in Chug-a-Lug. I got about 145 hours of college credit and no degree. I got 2 hours of everything. Brain surgery, horse farming, mathematics and agriculture. All kinds of stuff. But I met her. She was going to Stevens College at that time, a very exclusive girls' school in Columbia, Missouri. It was a Sunday afternoon. This place called the Italian Village. And I was laying under this table, and she was dancing on top of it. And I fell in love and pursued her and got her pregnant. That's how we used to get engaged back in the 50s. And I had picked her out of a crowd because, my golly, she had the same curse I did, the old Irish curse. She had a little drinking problem. And that's the one I was looking for. You see them coming into AA now. I mean, we were just kids. We didn't know nothing. Cynthia was telling you that she was one of those too. You see them coming in now. Now, I see there's needy Bill. He comes in knowing that if he's got the right woman, everything will be okay. Now, he's got 30 disastrous relationships behind him. But he knows that this table is going to be her. And he's wearing a tank top. He's pierced in all the right places. His ponytail's in shape. His muscle is curved just right. Where's the bathroom? Over there. His jeans are too tight, and he's wearing a roll of quarters in his pocket. And needy Jane walks in. She's wearing hot pants, tank top, no bra. Very purple on the eyelids. And it's January. And needy Jane sees needy Joe in the sparks, like an old Frankenstein movie. The sponsors saying, oh, God. And they turn and say, no, this is different. This is from God. Now we're using God for a pimp. And there you have it. That was Liz and me. 2 ticks and no damn dog. Just We bled each other to death, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. 8 years later, we got 5 kids. We're 2 drunks. I've become a drunken disc jockey up in Wisconsin. Oh, that was nice. There's nothing worse than getting caught being fried on the air. And I got caught, got fired. And about that time, my mother, bless her heart, was dying of cancer. But I was too busy. So I called my sister from Washington, who just had her first child. By this time, we have 5. And she couldn't keep her hands off me. Well, you look at me, you can't blame her. I shaved off the mustache, but people keep calling me Mr. Selleck. See, I can't go over on you, but the people on tape will They won't know what to expect. But it was a zoo. She was doing about 2 quarts of vodka a day, maintenance, and I could see her drinking because her alcoholism almost killed me because I couldn't see mine. She drank like my mother. She hid her booze. She always hid it in the dandy diaper ding dong thing. So I come home and kick down the door. So you've been drinking, haven't you? In Al-Anons, you'll understand this. We were both untreated AA and untreated Al-Anon. We were living with drunks, and we were doing all the non-Al-Anon stuff with each other. I'd make a line on our whiskey bottle. What a laugh. And I'd come home and I'd reach in there into this diaper pail, bleaching my arm up to the elbows, very proudly whip this thing out and go over to the sink, and I wouldn't uncork it, I'd unscrew it. She was drinking cheap junk. And pour the drink that I needed right down the drain. And then I'd pass out, and she'd go through my pocket and get what money I had left and go out and get some more, and the circle would start again. It was the kids are dancing around. Oh God, I'm 3. Next year I can get to kindergarten, get the hell out of this place. Ended up in New Bern, North Carolina. I was down in Wilmington, North Carolina. I was a drunken 11 o'clock newsman, and we had moved down there, starting over again. Got her into a state-run rehab up at Butner, and came out and helped her fail because I didn't know it. God, she looked great. She sounded great. Her eyes were clear. She was beautiful. And she didn't need me. And I would say things like, I liked you better when you were drinking. The non-treated Al-Anon stuff that gives us the excuse to go back. And within a few weeks, I had her drunk again. I was comfortable. I was more comfortable with the pain of her being drunk than the fear of not being able to handle her sober. And I guess she had the same thing going on with me. We had communications were in the bedroom. Me lie. That's why we had all those kids. We didn't know what else to do. Well, let's go to bed. Oh, fix that up. So there I was, changing jobs all the time, and she burned down an apartment down there. Things got a little hot for us. And it's funny how God works. I had quit going to church. I had given up on all things that were spiritual that made me feel spiritually good about myself. I remember getting a baseball and bat and a new glove from my oldest kid, being so proud of myself because, here's a new ball, here's a new bat, here's a new glove, kid. And I drove away and drank. And there stands this kid with nobody to play with, nobody to teach him. So I conned myself into thinking I was doing the right stuff. And when you've got 2 drunks in the family and you're a disc jockey, I ended up leaving that thing and going to New Bern, North Carolina, where I finally showed up, became a rock and roll disc jockey. I was cool. 34 years old and a drunken disc jockey. And to support myself, I was Eastern North Carolina's Ronald McDonald on weekends. Nose, yarn hair, hot stuff, 110 degrees on the macadam, gloves, big red shoes about 3 feet long, bad head, and the little kids would say things like, Mommy, Ronald smells funny. Ronald was in severe pain, too. It was just... But I had gone to work with this guy who had known me when I was just out of college in St. Louis, and he'd offered me a job when he bought this radio station down there. And by the grace of God, I'd been on the geographic cure and ended up 90 miles. And he called me up and says, hey, saw you on television. Why don't you come to work for me? Things had gotten hot for us after Liz burned down the apartment, so I went. And I was the program director, morning man, play-by-play guy, and Ronald McDonald on weekends. And one day, Bill came up to me, Bill Jeffrey. I always hung around these big, monstrous people. Bill came up to me, his head little stack of checks, Cynthia, about this thick. And he says, Mike, I got to tell you something. He says, I'm a respected member of this community. You've been here 6 months, and I got people calling me up because they're tired of trying to get a hold of you for all these bad checks that you've written in saloons. I said, well, Liz had this drinking problem. She failed rehab. He says, no, I'm talking about you. You all familiar with intervention therapy? Like they did for Betty Ford? Well, Bill did with me what I call primitive intervention therapy. He said, you're going to have to do something about your drinking problem. I said, well, what if I don't? He said, well, 3 things are going to happen. A, I'm going to beat you into insensibility. B, I'm going to fire you. And C, I'm going to have you thrown in prison for misappropriation of corporate funds. Well, dear hearts, no one had ever explained alcoholism to me that clearly before. Our little radio station, the 5,000-watt AM rock and roller, was in a little Holiday Inn down in New Bern, and he knew everybody in town. And 15 minutes later, I'm down in the coffee shop. Now, I knew where the Sturdy Beggar Lounge was because I pooped my pants in there twice the week before. I was at the age 30, almost 35 years old, and I lost control of my bodily functions. I was in bad shape. I couldn't function without some alcohol in my system. And it had been that way for quite some time. I had to have alcohol. Not drinking had never crossed my mind. I had never had any failures at not drinking. I haven't had a slip since I got to AA because I had one every day. I said, I'm not going to get drunk this time. Every day for years. I'm not going to drink this much. But not drinking never crossed my mind. Liz's not drinking crossed my mind a lot. You bitch. Drunk again, aren't you? You drunken slut. I mean, it was swell. You know, looking back, I can remember myself dragging her in front of a mirror one time after she'd been in that same sweater for a week. Drag her and say, take a look at yourself. Now, look at her. And I looked, and she wasn't looking at her. She was looking at me. And I was looking at her, and we both thought we were looking at the problem. I wasn't the problem, although it didn't help. I was the problem. And Dr. Silkworth, in the doctor's opinion, said the time will come when the alcoholic can no longer differentiate the true from the false. And that's where I was. I couldn't differentiate. And it talks about selfishness, self-centeredness being the root of all our trouble. And that our drinking was but a symptom. We feel the problem centers in the mind. Well, down the road in recovery, I can tell you that's true for me. I thought the problem was in the bottle. The problem was in me. And AA was about to offer me a simple kit of spiritual tools that was going to change me into a person who no longer was fighting not drinking, but living a lifestyle that doesn't require drinking. To which drinking would ruin my day. Now, I didn't know this. But I went downstairs, and there's a guy who was about 6'5", weighed 143 pounds, looked like a swamp crane. Jack G. sitting there, former liquor salesman, now selling used Cadillacs. And he's sitting there drinking coffee, and I'm going, still toxic from the night before. And I'm sitting through this crapola. And the amazing thing was, he didn't preach at me. He did what the big book suggests. He told me about himself and his struggle and his recovery. About 5 minutes into it, I said, God, that's alcoholism. Liz has that. About 10 minutes later, I said, oh, God, so do I. An amazing thing happened. I became on fire for AA. And this guy knew. He was a strange man. He said, Mike, he says, we're in this here's a little bitty old town. This Tuesday morning, we don't have a meeting till Friday night. We meet at 8 o'clock in converted Holy Roller Church behind the Mayo milk plant on Avenue D. So we're going to come to get you. She says, you show up if you want what we have. She says, you're probably going to ask yourself, how are you going to get from here to there without taking up a drink? He said, now, when you get that meeting, you're going to people talking about a higher power. Want to hear about a higher power? He said, I've been talking to you for a while, so I can see you're a real Yankee, sick little devil. He says, you ain't got time for no higher power. You better find Almighty God. You better find him right now. He said, you get upstairs at that radio station, you hide in your office, get down on your knees, your prayer bones, he called them, and ask God to get you through this day without taking of a drink. He said, if you make it, you hit your prayer bones tonight, you thank Almighty God for getting you through the day. And you do that every day, and we'll see you Friday night. Don't call me no more. I went upstairs on fire for AA. I didn't know what the hell I was talking about. But something happened. You hear that? You heard Cynthia say it. You hear people, those two words you hear in meetings. Something happened. And now I know. Liz, by this time, had the checkbook because I couldn't be trusted with it. We know how it is with a good book. Cynthia does. You pick it up, you can't put it down until you're through with it. And so she had this thing. She called me from the NP store because we didn't have a phone at home because I hadn't paid the bill in months. I had resentments against these people who were picking on me like that. You don't pay your bill, they'll turn it off. I said, that's disgusting. Victimized by Ma Bell again. So she's at the NP store, and she says, if you don't get me into a detox, I'm going to get enough booze, I'm just going to drink myself to death. I said, hold on, baby, I just joined AA. So I called Jack G anyway, and he says, well, you go out and see Gray Wheeler. He's working out at the news clinic. Get her out there, sign her in. So I jumped in the old Ford, and blue and white smoke coming out, and peeled out of the thing and headed down to her. She'd had a change of heart. I could see her rounding the corner with the checkbook under her arm. Wheeled up on the road. We played this scene out drunk many times. Tackled her in front of the Tryon Palace Seafood Market in broad daylight. Got her by the scruff of the neck. I was powerful. Still got a powerful right arm, although my left one was useless. Because I kept her from jumping. She was going to jump. Kids, 5 kids stuffed in the back seat. Don't jump, Mommy. Jump, I'll kill you, bitch, you know. Dragged her out there by the scruff of the neck and proudly signed her in as a chronic alcoholic. Now, you got to understand, I was sober an hour and a quarter. I'm on my first 12-step call. Mr. AA. And a guy by the name of, we used to have a lot of speakers meetings. That's where I learned actually how to finally get into the fourth step. I wasn't going to tell anybody that stuff. But I went to enough speakers meetings. I heard people tell from the stuff from the podium that I was still keeping private. And then, I had this steely-jawed midget in a zebra, in his painted lady, in roller skates, and a pith helmet, and a whip. I test my smile. I said, I did that. So I'm a slow learner. But I got sober on Tuesday, on Friday, and got sober on the following Tuesday. I'm sober a little while. I'm sitting over at this little place, and these guys, you understand, didn't speak like I did, so they couldn't be as intelligent as I was. They talked Southern, so obviously they were uneducated. And the ones who liked me assured me that damn Yankee was still two words. And the ones who didn't like me called me a Midwesterner. They thought that was worse. And Charlie V, let's get over this sponsorship thing. You talk about, and then you have to choose a sponsor. Well, in 1970, we didn't do that. We know that AA is a program of attraction rather than promotion. But once you show up at one meeting in New Bern, North Carolina, you've been attracted. And your ass is theirs. Now, they didn't wait for me to choose a sponsor because they knew I had no idea what that was. I was just barely getting learning the names of my kids, for heaven's sake. I'm sitting there and I'm reading the big book, and Charlie V, fourth grade education. It's over about 14 years. He says, "What are you reading there, college boy?" I'm reading a portion of chapter 5, big book, Alcoholics Anonymous. Is that so? What does it say on the dust cover of that there book down at the bottom? I looked and I said, it says it's the basic text. Is that right? He said, where do them textbooks begin? I said, I see. I mean, they begin at page 1. He says, this one don't. This here book begins page V, goes V, I, V, double I, V, triple I, I, X, and so on until your ass comes to triple X, and then you come to page 1. Why didn't you start at the beginning, Yankee? I'm standing here sober because the guy with a fourth grade education told me how to read. And the big book says we learned, we had to accede to our inmost self that we were alcoholic. Now these guys, 3 guys took turns sponsoring me. They drew short straws. I mean, I was despicable. Yeah. Took turns sponsoring the Yankee. And they would pick, I thought the first step was get in the car, Yankee. Because we didn't have a meeting every 30 yards like you do now, 24 hours a day. We had to drive all these little towns. And they didn't understand I had to be on there at 5:30. They didn't care. They took me to these meetings. He said, well, no, you can't go with Liz. You ain't going to dance off into the sunset of sobriety hand in hand. Don't work. She's got to get her own program. All of us have made it. Well, 90 meetings in 90 days. So, well, we can't do that. All of a sudden, we became parents. Who's going to take care of the children? I'll tell you who took care of them, the Al-Anon ladies. Came over and babysat while they took her there and me there. We got separate sobriety. Unfortunately, I was hanging with these guys. We would ride to a meeting and they would talk about the big book. They would talk about recovery. They would talk about what's happening in the big book, big book, big book. I'd say I could puke. But I was picking up what they were saying. I could say the same things. And we'd go to a meeting. Then they would quiz me on the way back from the meeting. From what I'd learned at the meeting, I failed every test. I said, these guys hate me. They're picking on me. They never once asked what kind of a day I had. They obviously didn't care. They wanted to know if I was telling the truth. And they knew I wasn't. I'd been to see a psychiatrist in St. Louis in 1962 because I was a chronic liar. And I walked out and said, psychiatry does not work. Well, I couldn't tell the poor bastard the truth about why I was there. I didn't tell him why I was there, and he couldn't help me. I couldn't tell him the truth. And I'd gotten so far divorced from the truth that I was in a blackout. They say if you can remember the 60s, you didn't participate. I must have participated because I don't remember much of the 60s. 4 of my kids were born then. And I did have some of those other things, too, to the last 2 years of my drinking. I had about 11 acres of Pamlico County flower tops, which I washed down with all kinds of booze. I don't remember what it did for me except stoplights lasted about a week and a half. And they were out to get me, whoever they were. So I get into Alcoholics Anonymous, and about 9 months into the program, I'm filling in for one of my disc jockeys. Everybody's changed their attitude. My boss got really well. He stopped screaming at me. He was getting better. And I was filling in for one of my disc jockeys on a Saturday morning. I was playing something by the Moody Blues, probably Nights in White Satin. And God just kind of gave me one of these big videoscopic things, my whole life and my dependency on alcohol, way back to the beginning. I said, oh, God, I really do have alcoholism. And it's at that point, 9 months into my sobriety, that I acceded to in my inmost self that I was an alcoholic. And that's where I got the first step. 9 months without booze. So I went back to these 3 criminals and I said, hey, guys, let's do it. So they pistol whipped me through the steps. And oh, God, they knew I was a liar. God, and the 4-step stuff, oh, man, I didn't want to do that. You know what happens? A lot of people think the changes begin in the 6th step, but if you really look at that 4th step and read the black part, while we're making those lists, some other things happen. It points out the problem with resentment. We couldn't get rid of them any more than we could our drinking. What were we to do? There's the problem. And then the solution. This was our course. We tried to see where other people might be spiritually sick too. We asked God, and then later on we see that lack of power is our dilemma, because we say, God, save me. Don't help me from. Save me from being angry. We're beginning to develop a dependence on God. And all of a sudden we go from victim to perpetrator. We begin to say, oh, it's amazing that Bill sets us up and says, made a searching and fearless inventory of ourselves. The first thing we do is take inventories of everybody else. Bill's setting our ass up. Did you know that? You see those 3 columns and you turn the page and say, well, to see where other people are wrong as far as what most of us ever got. Now we're going to take a look at the list from another angle. Where were we at fault? Oh, God, now he's messing. When we get to that fear part, I didn't know that I had been in a total terror from the day of my birth till I got to Alcoholics Anonymous and sometime thereafter. And one of the things I was afraid of doing was the 5th step. I was going to tell anybody that stuff. So I put at the top of my list of fears, I was afraid to do the 5th step. And some of those other fears that began to come. And, well, what's the solution? Amazing thing happened. It's in the book. It says, we ask God to remove our fear and direct our attention to what He would have us be. And I always wonder I said, no, if I do what He wants me to do, maybe I'll be being what He wants me to be. That has nothing to do with this. It has nothing to do with anything but fear. And at the same time I was recovering from this thing, I finally had the insight of what that means. I had the other book, and what would He have me be? And 3 words popped into my head, and I checked it out in the concordance, and these 3 words show up in the Bible, in the Old and New Testament, 39 times in specific order. That's when somebody shows up as an angelic being or a theophany, a God experience, or one of God's messengers. So people are scared to death. They hit the floor. And they say, no, be not afraid. That's what God would have me be, is not afraid. And the next line says that once I ask God to remove my fear, at once we commence to outgrow fear. Not overcome it, not run it down, but outgrow it. And it tells me that I've been reacting to my childish fears as an adult. I brought my childhood fears into my adulthood. I've been reacting to stuff that grown people don't react to. So here's where I begin to change in the 4th step, to grow up, to lose this fear of reacting like an adult. And then the sex thing. I sponsor a lot of young guys. I love them to death because they're as sick as I was. And I remember things like sex fondly. I always tell these guys, there's a line that says, hey, don't worry about this part. It says right here, only God can judge your sex situation. That's the good news. I'm going to give you the bad news. God will judge your sex situation. It's all gone, Mike. It's not in the book. I know. I like to throw it in to make you nervous. To put God in charge of my sex life just seemed out of the question. But it says our sex powers were God-given and therefore good. Well, that was news to me because I had not done anything good with it. 5 kids came as a result. That was good, but it wasn't my fault. That was God's thing. Well, we got sober, and finally 2 years into this thing, I got around to making amends to Liz. And I want to tell you, if you're getting ready to do your 8th and 9th step, hang on to your sponsor. I'm big on sponsors. I don't make any major moves to this day without calling my sponsor and reporting to him what I'm thinking. Now, if I call him after the fact, he says, what the hell are you telling me for? You've already done this. Check with me before you make these major life mistakes. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I'll give you some options. And I always choose the wrong one. And I come back and he doesn't say, I told you. He says, did you learn anything? Yes, pain hurts. Yeah. But these guys prepared me, said, unless you can forgive everybody, do not attempt to make a 9-step call on that person. Unless you're going to clean up your side of the street and you have nothing against that person. And you're ready. This is a justice step. This ain't about mercy and forgiveness. This is about being ready to pay the price, and it's part of the growing up thing. We're willing to pay the price of the stuff we've destroyed. If we're not willing, don't even try it. So I finally got around to Liz. I said, Liz, it's 9-step time. She said, I'm glad you brought this up. I said, I know I've offended you and hurt you in so many ways and abused you. She said, yeah, that's right. What would you have me do? She said, I'm glad you brought that up. I want you out of my life. I found somebody else that I want to marry. You know, and for years, she had, and I was loved it because the sparks would come out of her. She said, I hate you. And I knew that there's a thin line between love and hate, and she just stepped over it every now and then. But this time she said, I do not love you. That hurt. Not being loved is much worse than being hated if you're an alcoholic. So I went to Charlie V., who was my sponsor that week, and I explained to Charlie what was going on. I said, Charlie, me, ow, hurt, pain. Ow, me, hurt, now. Pain, pain, I, me, now, hurt. Charlie says to me, what an opportunity for spiritual growth. If you've never wanted to kill your sponsor, you might want to get a new one, because they're going to tell you stuff. Sponsors deal with truth. And I was able to get through that without drinking, and time went on, and I was really low. And I ended up being sober, doing the same damn thing I was doing drunk. All of a sudden, 3 years into my sobriety, I'm working in Washington, D.C. in a major network. I'm making enough money to support me and my kids. And I still got other bad sponsors. Oh, you got a nice raise. So do your kids. Wait a minute. The contract says, no, you get a raise, your kids get a raise. He says, and they reminded me, and I pass it on to you guys that are paying child support. That is not amends. That's your duty. And it's also a joy to participate in keeping your kids alive, whether you're with them or not. And it became a joy for me. And the first bill I paid every month, well, I got a raise. Sometimes I got a 100% raise. I did good. I went from disc jockey to radio announcer to personality. Amazing. You're doing the same thing, but when you get a different title, the money just goes piling in. You know? So I went flying out. But down the road, I got married again. I want to tell you that. I went to the Delray Club with my sycometer on and picked one out. Healthy, sick, sick. Hello. Hi, baby. My name's Mr. A. Would you like to have a relationship? Yeah. This was perfect. She was only 19 years younger than me, covered with skin, big blue eyes. You can look in her eyes, see the back of her head. I said, this one's made in heaven. Now, that was a sexist thing to say, but let me tell you about women, what women can do. You look in their eyes, they can split their brains and hide them. Okay? Harry Belafonte told us, that's right, the woman is smarter. That's right, the woman is smarter. They live longer, they got all the damn money. So I'm there going, she got you, Mr. Macho Man. You know? 5 years later, I'm standing in the parking lot. She's run off with a practicing junkie. She says, maybe I'm not good at this. Maybe I'm not good at this. So I went and saw Father John down at Loyola Retreat House. And he said, Mike, he says, you're right, you're not good at this. He's an ex-drunk. He says, we can get you some annulments, you get married again, or he says, you keep that damn thing in your pants, maybe it was some use to somebody. And it's amazing, I did that for 17 years. I've been chaste. That's S-T-E, not S-E-D. And I have some very intimate relationships with some very wonderful women. And I know things about them their husbands don't and their sponsors don't. It's just, I could write a book, baby. But somehow, not because I'm old and decrepit, but I can be trusted with women now because I respect them in a way I never did before. And I thank Alcoholics Anonymous for that. Now, this woman that left me for this guy, married this wonderful guy who later I discovered just before she died, she developed an eating disorder. I believe she probably never did a fourth and fifth step, and you know what the big book warns us about that? We may not overcome drinking. And 16 years into her sobriety, after several years of bulimia, exacerbated by Valium and alcohol, she died a very painful death. And just before she died, I discovered that wonderful man she'd left me for had molested my 3 daughters. Sponsorship. I went to Moses, black guy, and it always helps if you've got a sponsor named Moses. Doesn't say much, but he looks at you. He's about the color of a 1949 telephone. A wonderful, wise, and wonderful man. I love him. And I went to Moses. I said, Moses, I told him what was going on. He said, I just got one question. Do I kill the son of a bitch myself, or do I have him killed? And this is what sponsor is about, because remember selfishness, self-centeredness? I was off the program. It was about me. He said, when did you become the injured party? Why don't you go out there and kill some people? That'd be nice. And go to prison for the rest of your life and drag your daughter's names to the paper. They haven't suffered enough. Let's get them some publicity. Let everybody know what's going on with them. Or you try to get them some counseling and be there for them. Duh. That's what sponsors are for, to get them back on track. I took the latter, and they got some counseling. And I knew that they were going to have to get very, very angry at me, their mother, and this poor sick man who had molested them. And over and over for that, and they finally came down to the island where I lived, and they just let me have it. And thanks to AA and Al-Anon, I was able to help them through this very righteous anger that they had because they had been cheated. And they would ask, why weren't you there for us? I was 1,000 miles away. But I had wanted everything to be going okay, so I had just assumed that without me in their lives, everything was fine. And I said, honeys, I didn't know what was going on, and that's no excuse. I should have made it a point to know what was going on, and I didn't. I hope someday you can forgive me. And they did, right there. And I thought I was the worst father in the world because alcoholics will hang on to the negatives. The very next Christmas, they asked me to come out to Memphis because they remember what I did for them one time or several times in between drunks. They wanted me to read a Christmas carol for them like I did for their kids, like I had for them. So I've made a relationship now with my 9 grandkids. My sons and I were able to, they came and lived with me, so I was able to make amends with them. And my 37-year-old son Mike's 12 years sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. My sister, who couldn't understand what my problem was, has now got 17 years of sobriety in Alcoholics Anonymous. And she's my best friend. We were sibling rivals right at the time where she sobered up. And I prayed for her for 13 years. And she finally came to me one time. She said, Mike, guess what? I said, what, beloved sister? She said, I'm an alcoholic. I said, no kidding. Well, you aren't going to sponsor me. I said, I wouldn't touch you with a 10-foot pole. So I took her to that same Del Rey Club. By the way, it wasn't 13-step headquarters. I made it that for one evening. And turned her over. Miss Kitty had been sober since dirt, and Pat hasn't had a drink since then either. So we got a recovery family. I got a son that needs to be in it. And the amazing thing is that about 3 weekends ago, young Eddie, my youngest 33-year-old, who was 2 when I sobered up, was having a birthday. He's still out there. And my son, who lives close to where I do, my oldest son, and his wife and their new 4-month-old baby, flew out to Memphis, where for the first time in my life, I saw all 5 of my kids and all 9 of my grandchildren at the same time. What a treat. That's where this. Now, do you new people, it doesn't sound like much. Well, if you're an old frump, you'll appreciate this. The small things that seem very small are really, truly important. People are important. My dad, Big Ken, he lived forever. My mother died young. A couple of years ago, I had been trying to make a direct amends to him for years. He didn't want nothing. In fact, it took him 25 years to believe that I was really sober. And on my 25th anniversary, July 19th, a card came, son, congratulations on 25 years of sobriety, July 19th, 1970. He knew the very day. It only took him 25 years to accept it. And that a couple summers ago, back in 98, he said, Mike, he says, Irene, you're retired now. And he talked outside of his mouth. Irene's got to come out and marry up one of her grandchildren. Can you come out and spend some time with me? He couldn't get around too well then. I said, sure, Dad. So I went out there, and here's this guy who wasn't quite as tall. And he had a talking book machine. Now, towards the end of my career in Washington, I recorded books for the blind and physically handicapped for the Library of Congress, and they were in libraries all over the country. And I'm out there, I said, what's that talking book machine? He said, well, boy, he says, I don't see that good no more. So Got one of them talking book machines. I said, good, what'd you get? He said, well, I like Westerns. The first one I got was one you recorded. I said, oh? See, this guy never loved me. He never understood me. He didn't know about me. He didn't love me, my perception was. I said, what'd you think of it? He said, fine job, boy. 63, he still called me boy. I said, well, how long have you had this machine? He said, about 6 months. I said, how come you still got that tape there of that first book? He says, well, the funny thing happened, boy. He says, I took it back to the library and lost the paperwork, so I just kept some bitch. So I was amazed. And I said, well, you still got that thing. How come you kept it? And he says, well, boy, to tell you the truth, every now and then I just needed to hear the sound of your voice. See, I had been wrong. My perception was that my dad didn't love me because he didn't love me the way I demanded to be loved. He just loved me the way he did. And I was saying that's not love. So I learned to take what's there for what it is. My old man loved me like he did. And from that point on, he'd heard me every Saturday morning. And then towards the end of '98, he called me up again and said, son, he says, I'm not doing too well. I'm in this recovery place. They got tubes down me. And he says, Irene is the cruel stepmother. We knew it would never make it. He was married to her 39 years. And always been very kind to me and my family. He says, Irene's a sweetheart. And Irene's the only way 80 she can't take. Can you help me? I said, Dad, I'll be out on the next plane. And I was. And while I was there, he decided to die. And one of the funny things, when I was 8 years old going to parochial school, I'd heard the F word for the first time. I loved it. I don't know what it meant, but I liked it. I wrote a little song about it, which I shared with the family at dinner. And my dad would normally just backhand me against the wall. He says, we need to talk. Did you ever know what they see? When I was sober, you know what? We need to. People say that we need to talk. And when were you invited to participate in on a survey of what we need to do? And what that means is, I need to talk, and your ass better listen. That's what that means. So we went for a walk. He says, boy, some of these days when you're ready, I'm going to tell you about the birds and the bees. In the meantime, I don't want you to hear that language, or I'll really let you have it. He said, you got it. So I'm at my dad's bedside. He's decided to die because he doesn't want tubes down his throat. So I said to him, Dad, you remember back in 1943 I wrote that little song about the effort? Yeah, boy, I remember that. So we went for a walk. You promised to tell me about the birds and the bees when I was ready. He said, yeah. I said, well, am I ready? He says, nope. He was great. But the amazing thing was, well, he decided that he wasn't going to live like that because he had had a very active life. And thank God, you could tell his mind was still working very well. He said, I think I'm just going to go ahead and die. If they take this thing out of my stomach, I'll die anyway. So I'm not going to lay around there and just be a vegetable being fed by tubes. And he said, I don't want to do that. What do you think? I said, Dad, I'm 63 years old. You've never asked me for advice. The first one he asked me about is something. Could you start with an easier question, maybe? So I told him what my sponsor tells me. I think what you think, Dad. So around Christmas time, it was a Wednesday, and I've been seeing him every night. My sister flew out, and we read his favorite Psalms to him at night and said his favorite prayers with him. And after he began to fade a little bit, we thought maybe he wasn't listening, but you still see his lips moving. It was a Wednesday morning before Christmas, and I had this need to go to Mass. And at the most solemn part of the Mass, at the consecration, I asked God to take my father gently. By the time I got home, the phone call came, and he had gone at that very moment. I was able to say, thank you for taking my father. And there's the difference between being drunk in 1968, cursing God for taking my mother, and being sober in Alcoholics Anonymous and thanking God for receiving my father. That's the best way I can describe what happens to one in Alcoholics Anonymous. Our perception changes. Our appreciation changes. We learn about God, about ourselves, and other human beings. The whole thing about AA, my friend Keith Hell says, is to find out who we are, accept who we are, and then forget who we are. If that makes any sense to you. It's not about us anymore. It's about you. It's about others. It's about family. It's about friends. It's about recovery. It's about God. I've got a wonderful working relationship with this God that I had recreated. Like Blaise Pascal said, God created man in his own image, and man has been trying to return the favor ever since. By the time I got to AA, God was a terrible tooth gap guy, gap tooth, long beard, hiding behind the cloud, and every time I screwed up, which is all day, he'd say, I got you again. You're going to purgatory for 25,000 years, then your ass is going to hell. Yeah? I came face to face with the second tradition. For our group purpose, there's but one ultimate authority, a loving God, as he may express himself in our group conscience. How could God love me? I broke all his precepts, all his principles. The old timers said, keep coming back. You know what I did. God loves me. He must love you. I said, well, if he loves an old bastard like you, he must like me all right. And I've learned that this God is a loving God. I saw a church bulletin a few years ago that says, God loves you just the way you are. But he loves you too much to leave you like that. And in my case, he loved me too much to leave me like that, and he gave me the 12 steps and the people and the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous that changed my entire life. I want to thank you for allowing me to come up here. I want to share one thing. You know, my mom, who never got this program, taught me many good things. Among them, one of the first things she taught me when she was teaching me Latin is something I'd like to leave with you. It's a little blessing. Pax Domini, sit semper vobiscum. May the peace of the Lord be always with you. Thank you.